mentioned that COVID has brought out a lot of spiritual errors and other insanities among the general public.
Yeah.
The most up and close and personal, in the literal most sense, is the use of face masks. What can you speak to the spiritual effects of face masks, and to what extent should Catholics be obedient to COVID madness policies, and when should they disobey?
Okay. The approach can never be emotional, it has to be completely principled in the approach. And so when it comes to the disobedience, I'm one of those guys that, as a matter of prudence, I'll wear it if I absolutely have to. If I don't, I don't wear it. And I think that's the first step, is just don't wear it if you don't have to. I think the other side of it is that the government has overstepped its bounds. At this stage, when COVID is obviously on the downside of it, and quite frankly, they never should have imposed the thing to begin with. Since we're on the downside, the government has overstepped its bound in requiring people to wear this. You know, if you read, how many here have read Klaus Schwab's The Great Reset? Yeah, a couple of people, a few people. He lays the whole thing out. They're just using this in order to manipulate society and to control it and to reorganize the financial structure and economies of the world. That's what their real goal is in relationship to this thing. But I think that being the case, they've overstepped their bounds. And in one sense, you're not bound in obedience to them because they don't have a right to tell you have to do it. However, don't be stupid, right? Because what good is it if you're in jail, or if if there's problem, and if the civil authorities are going to basically enforce something. Sometimes that you have to look at something, well, if it's not sinful, then there's going to be a certain level of compliance, and we just to make sure that we can continue doing what we're capable of doing. But at the same time, we need to be working against that. Right? We need to be stating the things stating and working and doing the educating, etc., of people to get out from underneath this. What are the spiritual impacts? When COVID first hit and they put the mask thing on, I talked to a psychologist about this, because she's a good friend of mine, and I said, and she's really good on relational psychology, how different kinds of the psychology in relationships, right? So I was talking to her about it, and I said, it seems to me that what's happening is that the mask is a sign of psychological separation. They're trying to psychologically separate people from each other. And the reason they're doing that is because the deep state, this whole thing, the Great Reset, is just another name for communism. The communists, the first thing they do to control a population is psychologically isolate them from each other. And that's what they're doing. And so the other side of it is something that I mentioned in my series on communism and Satanism, is that one of the things that communists do, because Satan or the demons do this as well, but the communists, one of the first things that they actually do is try and give constant reminders of who's in the driver's seat and who's in authority. So this is why You go into virtually any public area. You go into like the, coming here, going to through the airport in Denver. Literally every single place you look, there's a sign about, keep your distance, do this, do that, do this. And it's basically, it's a form of brainwashing. They're literally trying to strip us of our normal patterns of thinking in relationship to our relationships with people. And this is what, I think this is the thing that concerns me, that's what's happening, because I think that, when are we going to get back to normal? Well, if we all took our masks off right now, people aren't going to be normal for a little while. It's going to take time to readjust, because you corrupt a habit in 3 weeks and you build one in 3 weeks. We've been in this thing for months. So their mental habits have already changed. And so it's going to take time to get that back together. Spiritually, I think that it's, obviously it's having an impact because of the fact that, the church has kind of rolled over, and it's even impacted the liturgy and things of that sort, how many people come. You have to social distance. Of course, my name for it is socialist distancing. It's just one of those things that, I came up with that right off the bat, and then I said, obviously it was a common idea because everyone else started saying it too, but I think the thing is that it's, my concern is that COVID was not a sufficient reason to go into a lockdown. The fact of the matter is this a pandemic? Well, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that it's everywhere, right? It did spread, but it's not a pandemic in the sense that we're stacking bodies in the streets, and that's my real concern, is the fact that if we get to the point where we're stacking bodies in the streets, what are people going to be like if they're this nutty with COVID, right? So, but my point is that spiritually, I think that this is having a deleterious effect, because the people who are faithful, I think in some senses, are actually getting their spiritual lives a little bit more in line, but a vast majority of the people are just not. And I think it's having a deleterious effect psychologically, spiritually, health-wise too. There's all sorts of stuff on that level, but I think that's the real problem. So, okay, I'll give you a blessing. We'll wrap up. Benedictio Deum omnipotentis, Patris et Filii,